Here in Pakistan, the U.S. meets face-to-face with Iran for the first time in decades, but walks away without a deal to end the war. A special edition of This Week from Islamabad and Washington starts right now. No deal.
We go back to the United States having not come to an agreement.
After a marathon negotiating session, Vice President Vance leaves peace talks, with Iran refusing to commit to U.S. demands.
The simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon.
President Trump downplays the efforts to end the war.
Whether we make a deal or not makes no difference to me.
As U.S. ships enter the Strait of Hormuz for the first time since the war began, Navy destroyers starting mine-clearing operations in the critical oil passageway. So how can the shaky two-week ceasefire hold? What comes next on the path to end the war? I'll speak with GOP Senator Ron Johnson and Democratic Senator Tim Kaine. Plus, former CENTCOM Commander Joseph Votel on what the U.S. has achieved so far. Surprise statement.
The lies linking me with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today.
We'll cover all the week's politics, and former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy joins our roundtable. And
it's a special thing to be a human, and it's a special thing to be on planet Earth.
The Artemis II crew splashes down to Earth after a historic 10-day mission around the moon.
From ABC News, a special edition of This Week. Here now, Martha Raddatz.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. We are reporting this morning from Islamabad, Pakistan, where Vice President Vance has just wrapped up marathon peace talks with Iran with no deal to end the war, now entering its 7th week. After 21 hours of overnight closed-door negotiations with Iran, mediated by Pakistan, the vice president emerged to say that the parties had failed to reach an agreement, saying Iran was unwilling to make a firm commitment on not seeking nuclear weapons. And with that, the U.S. delegation heads back to Washington, and a fragile two-week ceasefire announced this week will now be put to the test. We will cover the very latest, both here and in Washington, but we begin with the state of the talks and what comes next in this conflict.
The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement.
This morning, no breakthrough in talks as the U.S. and Iran fail to hammer out a permanent resolution to the war in Iran.
And I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the United States of America. We've made very clear what our red lines are, what things we're willing to accommodate them on, and what things we're not willing to accommodate them on. And we've made that as clear as we possibly could, and they have chosen not to accept our terms.
The two sides meeting behind closed doors for 21 hours, working well into the night to find a resolution, but yielding no progress.
The president told us, you need to come here in good faith and make your best effort to get a deal. We did that, and unfortunately, we weren't able to make any headway.
Iran's nuclear ambitions remaining a key sticking point.
The simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon.
With Iran's Speaker of the Parliament and lead negotiator posting that the opposing side ultimately failed to gain the trust of the Iranian delegation in this round of negotiations. America has understood our logic and principles, and now it's time for it to decide whether it can earn our trust or not. Vice President Vance reaffirming the United States' position as he left Islamabad.
We leave here with a very simple proposal, a method of understanding that is our final and best offer. We'll see if the Iranians accept it.
As the marathon negotiations were wrapping, President Trump attending a UFC fight in Miami with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and dismissing the effort Saturday.
Whether we make a deal or not makes no difference to me.
The trilateral effort mediated by Pakistan was the highest level face-to-face meetings between the United States and Iran in 47 years. The breakdown in talks now putting the fragile temporary two-week truce agreed upon late Tuesday to the test, with differences in those agreed upon terms emerging throughout the week. The administration claiming Iran had agreed to open the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump posting on social media Saturday that the U.S. is now starting the process of clearing out the Strait of Hormuz as a favor to countries all over the world. The Pentagon said 2 Navy destroyers were clearing mines. In the days since the announced agreement, few ships have crossed the passage, which remains under Iranian control. And on the key sticking point of Iran's nuclear ambitions, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth insisting this week the U.S. will secure Iran's enriched nuclear material.
We know exactly what they have, and they know that, and they will either give it to us, which the president has laid out. They'll give it to us voluntarily. We'll get it. We'll take it out.
The temporary truce came under immense pressure. Just before Tuesday night's deadline to Iran, Trump stunningly said, "A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will." A lot to discuss. I'm joined now by GOP Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Good morning to you, Senator. You have been a supporter of this war, but after 21 hours of really historic negotiations, there was no deal cut, and it's basically, according to J.D. Vance, take it or leave it. What's your reaction?
Well, good morning, Martha. Well, first of all, I'm not supportive of the war with Iran, but that's because Iran declared war on America 47 years ago. They have blood on their hands of American soldiers, hundreds, probably thousands of them. But it's the Ayatollahs, it's the regime that declared war on America, not the Iranian people. So we're not at war with the Iranian people. We're trying to end the state-sponsored terrorism. We're trying to end the threat, the menace that Iran represents not only to America but to world security and peace. So I'm supportive of ending the Iranian regime's ability to threaten world peace and security.
And what's your reaction to what happened here in Islamabad with no deal? What do you think happens now?
I'm not surprised at all. The Ayatollahs, even though they have been, so degraded in terms of their capabilities, nobody thought this would be easy. They've been preparing for this for 47 years. They have multiple layers. They've got 200,000 people in the IRGC, 600,000 people in the Basij police force. They are brutal. By the way, this is exactly what nationwide gun control results in. The Iranian people are completely disarmed. It's going to be very difficult for them to rise up. And so it's a very difficult situation. Now, I hope that President Trump is successful in this, because if we could just imagine the world if the Ayatollahs, the brutal Iranian regime is no longer in power. That's what we're trying to achieve.
The president was at a UFC fight in Florida with Marco Rubio during the negotiations. He was getting updates, but earlier in the day, he said, whether we make a deal or not makes no difference to me, and the reason is because we've won. It makes no difference?
Well, first of all, we will not have won until we have completely defanged the Iranian regime. We have to make sure. I thought it was very interesting in President Trump's address to the nation when he spoke to the families of Dover, how apparently to a person they said, finish the job. And to me, finishing the job is to make sure that Iran can never produce a nuclear weapon. They can no longer enrich uranium, that hopefully we can remove that enriched uranium, that they can no longer hold the Strait of Hormuz hostage, that they can no longer brutalize the Iranian people, they can no longer be a sponsor of state terror. So we have to finish the job. Again, there's multiple ways of potentially doing it, short term, long term. There are multiple avenues we can approach here, but we have not yet finished the job.
Meanwhile, we have 50,000 troops in harm's way right now. We have Gulf allies in harm's way. We have gas prices spiking, oil barrels, the price raised there. President Trump was asked about people who are not fans of the war, asked specifically, what do you say to Americans who are not fans of the war? And he said, they're foolish because the war is about one thing: Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. So what would you say to those Americans who are sitting at home seeing those 50,000 troops in harm's way, seeing gas prices spike, and listening to you saying how complicated this could be and that it could continue for a long time.
Well, first of all, it's a good answer. That's exactly the reason why we have to make sure that the Iranian regime is ended. Whether it's President Obama, President Biden, President Trump, they all said we can never allow Iran to become a nuclear power. The problem with what President Obama and Biden did is they coddled the regime. They funneled billions of dollars, strengthened the regime, allowed them to sponsor state terror, allowed them to continue enriching uranium. And at some point in time, we had to act before we couldn't, before Iran became a nuclear power, before they had so many missiles and so many drones that this kind of action would have devastated the region. It's already done enough damage. So again, I know it's a tough decision for President Trump because he knew it wouldn't be easy. And it's not easy, and it could be longer term here. But I don't believe it's going to require boots on the ground, potentially assets to help the Iranian people. Other people eventually completely destroy the regime. But let's face it, this regime is incredibly weakened. All their bold statements reminds me of Baghdad bomb. They are not in a position of strength right now. And we also have to make sure that China and Russia no longer help Iran. I heard a very disturbing report that apparently China's going to be sending man pads to Iran. We need to express in no uncertain terms China had better not do that. We certainly have the capability of blocking oil from the Strait of Hormuz going to China as well. So again, we have plenty of
Senator,
power in this situation, and we need to use it.
Senator, I want to go back to you saying that President Trump had a good answer about what do you say to Americans who are not a fan of the war. He did say they're foolish. Do you agree they're foolish not to be fans of the war?
No. The answer he gave that I agreed with is we cannot allow Iran to become a nuclear power. They have missile technology. All they would have to do is park a barge in international waters off the shores of the U.S., lob one of those missiles, have a high-altitude nuclear blast, an EMP event. We could wipe out America's electrical grid. That would be existential threat to America. So Iran represents an existential threat to America. That's why Obama, Biden, and Trump said we can't allow them to become a nuclear power, but they're racing toward it. Martha, if Iran didn't want to be attacked, if they want to be left alone, all they had to do was say, we're not going to enrich uranium. We'll allow inspectors in to make sure that we're not doing it. Because they didn't allow that, because they allowed their economy to become devastated, just proves the point that they were absolutely dedicated to become a nuclear power and threaten and potentially destroy America. We had to take that threat seriously.
But, Senator, they're not doing that. They're not stopping. The strait is essentially closed. They still have that enriched uranium. So what do you do now? You yourself did not like the president threatening civilian power grids and structures. So if the ceasefire fails, what do they go after? What do they do?
Again, you keep degrading the Iranian regime. I think it's interesting that you have Iranians actually calling in airstrikes against some of their leadership. It's remarkable the amount of destruction we've already brought to the Iranian regime without really harming that much civilian infrastructure. So again, I think we continue down that path. We make sure that we deter China and Russia from helping out Iran. We continue to weaken the regime until they are no longer effective and the Iranian people can reclaim their own liberty and take over Iran themselves. Again, it's going to be a long-term project.
And that could go on for a long time.
I don't think Trump thought it'd be easy. It could take a long time. But again, the threat was there, and the threat was growing. And at some point in time, we had to act before we no longer could. That's why I supported what the President Trump, when he made an incredibly difficult decision to finally act. But now we have to finish the job. And that may take some time, and it could be complicated, and it could be risky. There's no guarantees here, but we could not allow Iran to become a nuclear power, threaten the region, threaten the world.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us this morning, Senator. Appreciate it.
Have a good day.
Let's bring in Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee and Foreign Relations Committee. Good morning to you, Senator. You saw these negotiations break down. J.D. Vance said they presented the final offer, and then he went home. What is your reaction?
Well, Martha, we need to extend the ceasefire. We shouldn't be in this war to begin with. You know, what people need to realize is we had a diplomatic control over Iran not seeking a nuclear weapon that Donald Trump decided to tear up. And we had an open Strait of Hormuz and reasonable gas prices up until February 27th, when Donald Trump launched this war without the support of allies, the American public, or Congress. And so the ceasefire, while it is not perfectly holding, we need to find a way to extend it past April 21st. Both parties, when they left the negotiation in Pakistan, said the door wasn't closed to additional negotiation. And so even an imperfect ceasefire is better than resuming full war. I'm going to force a vote on another war powers resolution in Congress this week in the Senate, because returning to full war will just compound the suffering of American troops and the American citizenry who are suffering under a very, very devastated economy because of what Donald Trump has done.
You heard J.D. Vance, however, say it was a final offer. Whether he's open to talking to them again is something different than saying this is the final offer. We're welcome for you to come back and accept it or not. The Iranians have stood firm. They walked away from here as well, saying they would like to get closer to the American side. This seems like an absolute red line for President Trump.
I'm not sure what President Trump's red lines are, because they seem to change all the time. His rationale for the war has changed all the time. You know, the threat to bomb the entire civilization, and 90 minutes before that, okay, we're not going to bomb the entire civilization. And I don't know exactly what the offer was that J.D. Vance put on the table. He had a brief press conference and he said, we need to make sure that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. But Martha, as you know, Iran entered into an agreement with the United States and other nations, both allies of the U.S. and China and Russia, in 2016, reaffirming that they would never purchase, seek, or acquire a nuclear weapon. Donald Trump tore that up. He tore up the restrictions on uranium production. He tore up the restrictions on centrifuge production. He tore up the deal that allowed intrusive inspections in Iran. So J.D. Vance says now that, well, Iran won't agree to what they agreed to 10 years ago. I'm sure Iran wonders, if we agree to it, will the United States tear it up again and bomb our civilian infrastructure and kill school children and engage in an assassination campaign against our leadership? This is not going to be an easy negotiation, because the last negotiation that led to a control of Iran's nuclear program, the U.S. made the decision to tear it up and walk away from the deal. I think that decision by President Trump to tear up a diplomatic deal will go down in history as one of the worst decisions in the foreign policy space ever made by an American president. If you make diplomacy impossible, you tend to make war inevitable.
And the war itself, one of the things you just heard Senator Johnson talk about is what he said now, whether, you know, they tore up that or not. He said now they are, Iran, an existential threat. Do you do not believe it's an existential threat, or there was an imminent threat?
There was no imminent threat. They are a regional threat. The regime is bad actors, for sure. The tragedy is the U.S. and Iran were friends in World War II. We were allies until the U.S. toppled the Iranian government in 1953. And since then, it's been back and forth between the U.S. and Iran for not 47 years, but for 80 years. And if war was the answer, we would have found it before now. They are a regional threat, but they posed no imminent threat to the United States. I'm on both the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committees. I'm in the classified facility at the Capitol all the time, and there was zero evidence of an imminent threat to the homeland from Iran. There was suggestion that if Israel attacked Iran, Iran might then turn its attention to U.S. forces in the region, our 40,000 permanent forces that we have. We should have talked Israel out of attacking so as to minimize risk to our own forces. Instead, we accepted the notion that Israel would attack, but there was no imminent threat to the United States from Iran, from a nuclear program, for their ballistic missile program, or for their other military activities. That doesn't mean that they're a good guy. They're a regional threat, but they weren't a threat to the U.S. homeland.
Senator, if we could just close on this, Trump has continued to blast NATO allies who are not supporting opening up the Strait of Hormuz. The president can't pull out of NATO, of course, but he could pull troops out. Are you concerned about that?
Yes. I mean, the president has been trashing NATO for years, long before he was president. And in this term, the tariffs that he has imposed on our allies, the language that he uses, calling Canada, a NATO ally, a 51st state, threatening the attack of Greenland, a part of Denmark, another NATO ally. He's really hurt NATO. And then he starts a war without consulting with them that has a huge effect on NATO allies' economy, and then gets mad that they won't join in. I mean, it's like you don't sucker punch somebody in a bar and then blame your buddies when they don't join the fight with you. I mean, if the president wanted the support of allies, he should have valued allies and respected them rather than putting tariffs on their economies and trash talking them.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there, and I appreciate you coming on this morning. Thanks so much, Senator. When we come back, General Joseph Votel, the former CENTCOM commander, tells us what may be next.
Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory on the battlefield. A capital V military victory. Together with our Israeli partners, America's military achieved every single objective, on plan, on schedule, exactly as laid out from day one.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth this week declaring victory in the Iran war. But what has the U.S. achieved in its military aims? For more on that, I'm joined now by former CENTCOM Commander General Joseph Votel. It's great to see you, General Votel. So no deal. What do you expect to happen now in the coming weeks?
Yeah, thanks, Martha. It's great to be with you. Well, I think hopefully what's going to happen is behind the scenes, they'll continue works to try to get back into some type of negotiations. I think that's really, really important. And at the same time, I expect the U.S. military to continue to maintain its presence. Of course, we heard from Admiral Cooper yesterday that they have begun a very deliberate process to open a route through the Straits of Hormuz, and I would expect that they would continue to do that moving forward.
And I want to talk about that in a minute, but I want to talk about the overall performance and what we have done so far. The military, of course, has done an incredible job with what they were tasked to do. But you have heard the president say, make threats about civilian power grids, civilian sites, antiquities, things like that. Would the military carry out those kinds of orders?
Well, I think our military leaders have a process by which they evaluate targets to assess the military value of those. And if there are concerns, then we have the ability to raise that to our civilian leaders and express those types of concerns. You know, moreover, I think we have to be concerned about targeting those types of targets that would in turn cause Iran to target similar type targets of our partners across the region. So I think it's really important that we do very deliberate planning here. I expect the military is doing that, and that we focus on those things that are most critical to reducing Iran's ability to make war and to threaten the region.
You heard Pete Hegseth say basically the war is won, a military victory with a capital V. Do you think the war has been won?
Well, I think we'll let the Secretary's words speak for themselves. I mean, certainly watching what the CENTCOM forces have done over the last several weeks has been really impressive, and there's been substantial dismantlement of Iran's war-making capability. It's not absolute. They still have the ability to launch some missiles, some drones, and of course they're still threatening in the Straits of Hormuz. So those are issues that will have to be either addressed through negotiations or through perhaps future military action. But certainly the performance of our military forces has been substantial, and I think it's significantly reduced the war-making capability of the regime.
But you would probably be the first to say those are tactical victories. And again, they have done an incredible job doing that. But strategically, they haven't really reached their goal, as we've seen here in Pakistan, because of the nuclear material.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we have to. Certainly has to be evaluated by our civilian leaders in light of our strategic objectives. And but what the military has done is largely move forward substantially against the military objectives that were identified for them at the beginning of this. But as we know, war is a political state here, and it involves more than just the military. It involves our diplomacy, it involves our economics, it involves the power of our information, and so all of those capabilities have to be brought to bear for us to, I think, declare some end state.
Pete Hegseth has also said if we don't get that nuclear material, our troops may go in and get it. Somehow we'll go in and get it. Talk about the difficulty of a mission like that.
Well, there's a lot that our military can do, and without getting into a whole lot of details, we certainly have the capacity to do this. But an operation of that nature, well into Iran, would be significant. We'd not only have to put, the specialty troops on the ground that we require to operate in that environment. We'd have to secure them. We'd have to make sure over the top of them we had air cover. And then, of course, we'd have to be prepared to reinforce and sustain them for a period of time. This is likely not going to be something where we'll be able to go in and do in a period of darkness. It will take days and perhaps longer to get control of that. And then we have to transport all of that material out of Iran to some safe location. So I think it's fair to say that that's a significant operation, and it will require a lot of resources and a lot of focus and a lot of time to accomplish.
And back to the Strait, if we can. Those destroyers apparently went through yesterday. We're trying to clear out mines. How successful can that be? How difficult would it be if Iran does not open that strait for us to do that?
Well, again, I think this is within the military capabilities of the United States, and I think what we saw yesterday is the first part of what will be a very deliberate effort to clear routes through the Straits of Hormuz that can be proofed, and then hopefully build some confidence with commercial shippers to begin moving their ships in and out of the Gulf. And that all takes time, and I think we're approaching this properly and very deliberately, and making sure that we set the conditions for success if that's what we have to do.
Okay, thanks, General Votel. It sounds very complicated. We appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you, Martha. Good to be with you.
And let's bring in our panel, the New Yorker's Susan Glasser and NPR's host, Mary Louise Kelly. And Susan, let me talk to you first. Earlier this week, again, we heard Pete Hegseth declaring victory, saying victory with a capital V, guided by the hand of God. You wrote this week, if this is victory, I would hate to see what failure looks like.
Yeah, Martha, I mean, it's a really striking box to a certain extent of President Trump's own making. You have the specter of J.D. Vance flying all the way to Pakistan in order to negotiate, first and foremost, on the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, which, of course, was open before the conflict. And in that sense, it's very hard to see the administration claiming it's this enormous victory when what they're negotiating over is to try to get the world and the global economy is suffering as a direct result of this back to the status quo ante. And right now, that seems like a very distant goal.
And Mary Louise, do you think there's any chance of resurrecting these talks? You've heard that J.D. Vance basically said, take it or leave it. The Iranians said they'd like to get back together. Do you think that'll happen?
I certainly hope so. I mean, we certainly have to all be rooting for peace. This was round one of diplomacy in what we knew was going to be a really hard set of circumstances to produce a great big deal out of. So we still have until April 21st for the ceasefire to hold, and what a ceasefire it can do is create some space the killing stops, most of the fighting stops. We obviously, there's still a lot of fire going in this ceasefire, but it hopefully creates some space for diplomacy to pick back up. But the challenge, has been that they started so far apart. There was no trust, and that's going to be a very high hurdle if the starting point remains, this 10-point plan that the Iranians put on the table that the U.S. correctly has said that we can't work with, and the Iranians feel emboldened. It's a very high mountain to climb, but there is still time.
Susan, we've heard a lot about regime change. Obviously, a lot of senior leaders were killed, and you had negotiators here in Islamabad from Iran. Are they different than the regime before? What do you see in terms of regime change?
Yeah, I mean, this is a remarkable conversation even to be having in many respects, Martha. I mean, it's almost amazing to me that we have a situation where the president is claiming total regime change when what he's done is swap out one supreme leader named Khamenei for another supreme leader named Khamenei, except he's the son, younger and reportedly much more hardline than the father, and of course also presumably embittered by the fact that the United States and its partner Israel have killed his father and other members of his family. And so, Iran's president, same leader it was before the war. Again, this is a theocracy that's been remarkably durable. And, it was a kind of asymmetric war in which survival of this government itself was a form of victory for Iran. And so, it's not a claim that holds up to real argument. And that's the tragedy for me, Martha, of this moment, is that the president started out saying to the people of Iran, help is on the way. Remember, there was the terrible mass killing of thousands of protesters at the beginning of 2026 that in some ways was the precipitating event here. And yet there's a possibility, and I hope it doesn't come to that, where the people of Iran end up in a situation where their government may be even more entrenched as a result of this military conflict.
If I could just jump on that, you have a situation where Iran has now proved to itself and the world it can stand up to the greatest military in the world, the most powerful military the world has ever seen, the United States, also the most powerful military in the region, where, to your point, Susan, the regime may well feel emboldened, where Iran's regional proxies have been standing up. That's what we're seeing on this other front in Lebanon. And yes, their missile program has been set back. Yes, many Iranians have been killed. Yes, they have taken massive hits. But they've gained the leverage of the Strait of Hormuz, which they didn't have before, at least not in a proven way that will be both strategically and economically hugely helpful to Iran going forward.
Mary Louise, you and I have both been in Iran together. We have talked to the people. I want to go back to the people on the ground. Do you see any potential for that population to have the ability to rise up at this point, as President Trump said he basically wants them to do?
Look, one can be a journalist and be objective and also hope for Iranians to have the government that they deserve someday, a government in which Iranians enjoy free speech. And that feels still a very long way away today. One of the tragedies of this is that it is hard to see that ordinary Iranians are not much farther away from being able to rise up than they were prior to February 28th and the start of this, and that the economy is going to be, further in great difficulty as a result of this. So yeah, that is very challenging. We don't have a reporter on the ground. I don't think you have a reporter on the ground inside Iran and ABC. It's very hard to know what is on people's minds, but as our colleagues talk to people coming out at the borders in Turkey, at the borders in Iraq, with Iran, and describing what they see and what this experience has been like of these last few weeks, people are still terrified to speak, and describing great fear for what will happen for their country and their families in the weeks ahead.
And Susan, we're running out of time here, but I do want to have you close this about how you think this will end.
Yeah, I mean, look, on some level, Donald Trump has already signaled that he's probably not very interested in resuming full-scale conflict here. The economic price, not only to the United States, but the global economy ratcheting up here. It might be the off-ramp that he's taken of the ceasefire. I think the Iranians know that, though. That's part of why you saw very little movement in those negotiations, is because I think there's been a very clear signal from Washington that Donald Trump may have reached the limits of his interest in conducting this conflict.
A lot to watch in the coming weeks, thanks to you both. When we come back, we'll throw it back to Washington and my co-anchor, Jonathan Karl.
The lies linking me with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today. The individuals lying about me are devoid of ethical standards, humility, and respect. I never been friends with Epstein. Donald and I were invited to the same parties as Epstein from time to time.
First Lady Melania Trump there this week with a surprise statement at the White House denying any relationship whatsoever with Jeffrey Epstein. Let's bring in the roundtable. Former DNC chair Donna Brazile, SCOTUS blog editor Sarah Isgur, the author of the excellent new book out Tuesday called Last Branch Standing, and former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy making his debut here on the roundtable. So look, let's start with what the news just out of Pakistan and out of the president. He's now saying that he's imposing a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. Two lengthy statements on Truth Social. One saying, at an appropriate moment, we are fully locked and loaded, and our military will finish up the little that is left of Iran. So, Kevin, what do you make of this? Are we back to war, or?
No, I don't think we're back to war, but I think this is very smart. If Iran thinks they can control the Strait and people are just going to pay them, what President Trump is saying, no ship gets out of there. You're not going to pay Iran. And for anyone who thinks, look, I give JD credit. A negotiation like this isn't going to solve on the first time. All great negotiations, you have to walk away. And every day America is going to get stronger because for the first time now, our destroyers are in the Strait taking the mines out. This is putting Iran in a weaker position. The president is very clear, ships won't go through unless all ships go through. And each day that we take the mines out, and that it shows America with JD, you're not going to have a nuclear weapon or we're not having a deal. That's very clear of a red line. If you want to get to a peace, this is what you have to do.
I mean, in fact, sir, the Iranians were getting stuff through the Strait. They blocked everybody else, and I'm told they had sold like 1 million barrels of oil since the war at a much higher price. So there have been, I've seen serious people proposing this for weeks, the idea of cutting off the Strait.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think when we look back on this moment, we will not talk about the individual war here or the individual choices about the Straits of Hormuz. I think we will look back and see a quarter century of America trying to solve a problem of the Middle East and instead managing a problem in the Middle East, and that this war looks once again like an attempt to solve the problem by Donald Trump. He thought he could do it differently or better than his predecessors for the last 25 years, and here we are, and it looks a whole lot like where we started.
Donna, it was interesting seeing you had J.D. Vance, who had not really been a part of the, central to the war effort as far as we could tell, being sent on this mission to lead the delegation. Historic, by the way. This is the highest level talks between the Iranians and the Americans since 1979. At the very moment that he came out to announce no deal, take a look at this split screen. We had the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, on the right there, at the UFC fight with the president, seeming to be enjoying the championship fight, while the Vice President of the United States was announcing no deal. What are the stakes here for J.D. Vance?
Well, the stakes are very high, clearly because J.D. is, the vice president is known as someone who is a peacemaker. He's not for these so-called forever wars in the Middle East and elsewhere. I thought it was like a dog-sniffing exercise where, you finally got a chance to, take a look at the other side and to begin to put all of the cards on the table. I agree. I think this is round one. What am I watching right now? I'm watching some of the other key indicators. The United States military, will we resume bombing? I'm watching Israel. Will they resume bombing in Iran? I'm also watching, what happens with this blockade. Will the United States finally get some of our Gulf allies and European allies to join us? And of course, I'm watching what happens on Tuesday when Israel sits down with Lebanon. Will they begin to figure out how to stop the war? But no, this was a dog sniffing exercise where you size up the other side and then hopefully you go back to the table and begin to some serious negotiations.
There's a lot of sniffing. This was a very long meeting. Went on, it was an all-nighter. But, Kevin, you said something interesting right before we came on the air here, that Trump loves that image of him being at the UFC fight while, the talks are underway.
This is where I think people misinterpret the president. He's communicating directly to Iran. When he says the things he does in the tweets, they're not for you or I. They're to them. So he's telling them they're not getting through. What he was telling Iran and those negotiators right then, I don't have to have a deal. I'm very comfortable. And where is he? He's in a fight match that's tough, that he shows people can win, and he's got Marco right next to him. If that's part of the negotiation, that gives America a stronger hand. If you're Iran and you're thinking that, this guy doesn't care. This guy's tough. This guy's going to shut down what money or oil we're getting, and now they're taking the mines out and we don't have a Navy to replace them. Maybe I should negotiate. And if JD said no nuclear weapons and he's willing to walk away, that's
but he doesn't
really
want this.
strong hand.
But the bottom line is the military is fully still present in the Persian Gulf.
Exactly. That puts a fear on Iran.
But are we going to be back in a war? Is the ceasefire going to be over with, or is this?
And that's
I think this is part of the negotiations to end it. You've got to show all your. The fear of the military is almost greater than when you use it. Because if we wipe everything out, they have no more fear. He's showing greater strength that they can't have money now, they can't control the strait, and you can't have a nuclear weapon. You should pick
But beyond symbolism, which I understand, the American people are tired and frustrated with this war. They're tired of the gas prices. They're tired of the uncertainty. So there's some domestic risk that the president has to also take into consideration. He needs an off-ramp. He needs to figure out what constitutes victory so that the American people, we're proud of the military, but the American people want to see some ending results and a strategy going forward.
But this is exactly why your point was so spot on. Iran knows that Trump has a domestic problem with this war and with gas prices. He needed to communicate to them that he was not going to cave. He was not in a weaker position here. And he's, as you said, quite comfortable with his domestic position.
It was also wild to see him go after Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Megyn Kelly in the
it's a
harshest
day
possible
ending in
term. So I want to quickly touch on the other extraordinary statement. Melania Trump comes out suddenly with no warning and talks about Epstein. I'm told the White House, nobody in the West Wing had any idea that she was going to do this. The president himself told the New York Times he didn't know that she was going to do this.
Welcome to being a campaign operative. Anyone who has done this for a living is very familiar with the spouse who sits on Twitter and sees random accounts saying negative things that they don't think are true and says, I want to go out and defend this. And you're like, no, ma'am, we are not doing that. That would step on the message, et cetera, et cetera. What you saw was the team lose. If the Streisand effect is when you file a lawsuit that brings more attention to something, the Melania effect is when finally Epstein is out of the news. You have an entire war in the Middle East, and you're like, no, please, let's talk more about Epstein.
It had finally faded away. I mean, at least from public, and now we're told search engine, search traffic online.
As we talk about all of the emails that she sent that are in the file, I mean, this is the worst.
And I think that's
decision.
Precisely why the First Lady decided that it was time for her to clear the air, to put her language out there. For example, in 1998, she met the president with another friend at the Kit Kat Club. She wanted to put her story out in her own voice, and she also said something I thought was very important. She said, please allow the survivors to come under oath and testify and tell their story. So I thought it was good on her part to get out there and clean the air.
We don't have much time left, but I want the allegations against Eric Swalwell, which have not been independently confirmed by ABC, he's denied them all. But serious sexual misconduct allegations, and now you have a an army of Democrats abandoning his campaign for governor. He was the leading candidate, a Democratic candidate for governor, and now he's facing calls to drop out from people like Nancy Pelosi.
Listen, let me be very clear. I tried to get rid of Swalwell 6-8 years ago. When I got the briefing, when I became leader with the FBI, Nancy Pelosi was in the room. I turned to her and said, how can you keep her on Intel? Intel is a select committee that only the leaders put on, that you know all the secrets that the members do not.
But
I made a motion.
Was this about sexual misconduct allegations, or?
It was a combination with the Chinese spy and led to all that. Every member in Congress knows not to let any young staffer get around Swalwell or Matt Gaetz. It's not a secret there. There's a reason why you didn't want those two people around. He was the leading candidate for governor. He probably could have won the primary and gotten there, but this all came forward. And these young women deserve justice.
I agree.
Donna, should he drop out?
His campaign is in a free fall right now with top staffers leaving. And let me just say this. As someone who knows at least one of the victims that have come forward, I'm very concerned.
Thank you, Donna. Up next, a look at the remarkable Artemis II mission, and we'll send it back to Martha in Islamabad. We're back in a moment.
Houston Integrity, splashdown, sending post-landing command now.
Splashdown confirmed.
Copy splashdown, waiting on VLDR.
Splashdown confirmed at 7:07 p.m. Central Time, 5:07 p.m. Pacific Time. From the pages of Jules Verne to a modern-day mission to the moon, a new chapter of the exploration of our celestial neighbor is complete. Integrity's astronauts back on Earth.
That was the moment when the Artemis II crew returned home to Earth after their historic journey around the moon. While we are here on Earth amid divisions and attempts to end a war, we saw remarkable images this week of the beauty of our planet and the moments that bring us together.
And liftoff. The crew of Artemis II now bound for the moon.
In a triumph of human achievement, the 10-day Artemis II mission shattered a 56-year-old record for the farthest distance from Earth ever traveled by humans. Those astronauts splashing down safely back at home Friday night.
Splashdown confirmed.
During their historic flyby of the far side of the moon and capturing those stunning images of our planet in the distance, the crew shared a poignant moment, captivating all of us back on Earth.
A number of years ago, we started this journey in our close-knit astronaut family, and we lost a loved one.
That loved one, the late wife of Mission Commander Reed Wiseman, Carol, who died in 2020 of cancer, leaving Wiseman to raise their two daughters. The Artemis II team suggesting they name one of the craters of the moon after Carol.
It's a bright spot on the moon. And we would like to call it Carol. And you spell that C-A-R-R-O-L-L.
The four astronauts sharing a long, emotional embrace. Artemis bringing humanity together to marvel at our closest celestial neighbor and serving as a reminder of what we can do on Earth when we are focused on exploration rather than division. Beautiful. And that's all for us today from Islamabad. Stay tuned to ABC News for the latest on the war in Iran. Thanks for sharing part of your Sunday with us. Be sure to catch World News Tonight and have a great day.